he's always there. He'll always listen. He knows what you're going through probably before you're even knowing that you're going through it.
Hey you guys, welcome back to the Raised and Redeemed podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Michaela, and today I have Rudy Wright on the show, who I actually met on TikTok, which is where I actually meet a lot of my guests. Rudy was saved from a rock bottom of alcohol addiction, where she was then given the ultimatum of either rehab or church. Well, Rudy chose church, and it just so happens that that's where she ended up finding Jesus too. You would never guess, looking at Rudy's life today, that this was the journey she walked, because God is so good and transformations in His name are real. Without further ado, let's get on to the show. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Rudy. I'm very excited to have you.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I found you on TikTok, where you have 20K followers, which is a lot. And it's obviously because you're very hilarious. Your family's very relatable. And I was looking back today and I'm like, and you've got some really good dance moves too.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, but I was going a little bit deeper in that, and I realized that you have quite the testimony too. So that's really what I have you here for today, is to hear a little bit about that. And, when I saw some of those testimony TikToks, I was like, wow, I never would have guessed, looking at your life now, that that's what it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let you speak to that, but I did see just some party lifestyle, addiction, depression, stuff like this. So I want to know how you got into that, and then how Jesus saved you from it, and then what in your life has changed since then.
Sure. Yeah. So some of the videos that you saw were talking about alcohol and the things I dealt with that. At first it turned into, or it was just kind of like I would just drink socially. I didn't see it as a problem. It wasn't a big deal to me. My family likes to drink, and so it was just a normal thing. And then it became very much an idol, especially when I hit college. I had a really hard time, just my life in general, have had a hard time making friends. And so I was I went to Point Park University. I live in Pittsburgh. I still live in Pittsburgh. And so I would commute, and there was a kind of a barrier then to make friends, because there's people that were hanging out all the time, people that had roommates and everything. And I was this girl coming in on the Pat bus, you know what I mean? Like, who is this person? So anyways, I started trying, and it's, in college, it's like you feel like you have a chance to be like a new person. At least that's how it was for me. It's like, oh, they don't know who I was before, I can be this brand new person that I think that this is how college is supposed to be. So it kind of started that way, of me just starting to realize other people drank. And so I would be like, okay, yeah, let's go we would literally just hop on a public bus and go find another college that was throwing a party, and we would just walk in, which is not safe, but we would do that all the time. And again, it was just very socially. And then it turned into, oh, this is what college is like. I'm supposed to drink. I'm supposed to hook up with these guys. I'm supposed to do all these things. And it just became, so I went for, I did go for dance. I was a dance major.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I was a dance major. So it was really, physically a lot. I ended up moving to a dorm. No longer a commuter. So then I was around it all of the time. And dance used to be my idol, and then alcohol became my idol. And I dealt with it, and it wasn't very obvious in college. It was just mostly oh, Rudy's just in college and she's just drinking and being a party girl, whatever. But it really wasn't until after college that became an issue. Whenever all of the friends that I had just made, they all went home. I was at home with my parents, who I love dearly. But I was by myself. My sister was still in college, and my older sister had moved out at the time. It got to the point that I was just very, very depressed. Being a dancer, I wasn't getting jobs. I was still living in Pittsburgh. I would go to New York and try to audition and everything. But at this point, I was teaching dance, which I love, but I really had a passion for performing, and it wasn't happening. And all of my friends were gone. And so it became, how can I get alcohol? It literally at any point of the day, it was I need to get through this day, and the only way that I'm going to get through it is if I drink. And so it started being I would just, and something, I don't know if it's a chemical in my brain or something, it doesn't tell me when to stop.
Yeah.
Hey,
I have that same chemical.
Yeah, it's hey, maybe you should not have another one. And it would never be that. It would be like just more and more and more to the point that I would just black out. I wouldn't like pass out. I would just black out and start saying things to people that I didn't know what I was saying. At first, people would tell me then the next day, like what I said, and it made me literally like sick to my stomach. So I got to the point that if I did drink and I knew that I blacked out, I would tell people to not even tell me like what I said, and I would just apologize. It got really bad, and it started getting into my relationship with my parents. So I was living with them, and I would go to the liquor store. I would teach dance. I would go to the liquor store. I would get a handle or whatever that was like a lemon flavor, and
Okay.
it was clear. So then I would put it in water and I would literally like watch movies and stuff with my parents, them not knowing. And I'm 20, 21 plus years old. It's not like I can't have a drink in front of my parents, but it got to the point of like I was sneaking it.
Yeah.
My parents would like find things and they would get upset. And I started going to therapy and everything. But nothing was really helping. And at this point, I didn't have a relationship with the Lord at all. Um,
So your family, were they believers or no?
we grew up going to a Presbyterian church, but we were like kind of in it, kind of out. And it was mostly like when, especially when I got older, if I did something bad, then I was like, oh, I have to go to church. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Oh, a punishment.
Yes.
Okay.
Um, super healthy. I had a handle on it, or what I thought was a handle, when I met my husband a couple years later. And then I started noticing I wouldn't sneak a lot with him, but it'd be a little bit that, and he'd be like, what's going on? Or if I got too drunk, he'd be like, hey, you got a little out of hand there. And there was one particular time that was really, really bad, that my dad actually was like, you need to go to rehab. Like, this is
Mhm.
how bad it's getting, and it's going to get in your relationship with, at the time he was my fiance, and I have a stepdaughter, and so he was like, this is bad, you need to go to rehab. And I refused. I was like, no, let me try out church,
Mm.
and see
Yeah.
how it goes. And to make a long story short, that was the only thing that quote unquote worked, was Jesus.
He found you there.
Yes, I went to church hungover the first like 3 months we were there. We would like party on Saturday, and then I would just go. My husband is just, he's not like, he smoked weed and stuff, but he wasn't a big drinker. So I would be like passed out on the couch, and he would be like, "All right, it's time for church. We're going." It was Christmas Eve, 2019. It was right before the pandemic, and I had like really gotten a handle on drinking. I would have like one, two beers if I felt like it, but I was in the middle of having a beer, and the Lord was like, "You don't need this anymore. I want you to stop." And I was like, and I knew, I was like, "Yeah, I think I do too."
Oh
And
my.
then the next day, it was just like gone. Like I had no desire to ever drink again. And even like smelling it or seeing it or anything, it just disgusts me. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's so gross. And who I became with it too was just so terrible.
Do you still, is it still like you have no desire anymore? Did that desire ever come back, or was it like from that day forward?
From that day forward, mostly. There's been seasons, not seasons, just like random, like 30 seconds where the enemy tries to be like, hey, that glass of wine looks good, or like, look how much fun those people are having, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But not because then I think about how I acted and how I felt after, and not even just like having a hangover or anything, but I was hurting a lot of people with what I was saying and what I was doing, and it was just, I mean, it was just pure evil what was happening. And so I don't really have that desire anymore. I'll usually tell my husband, or I'll tell somebody when it just like randomly happens. I'll be like, listen to what the enemy tried
Oh,
to do
yeah.
today. Like, are you serious that I already overcame that?
Oh my goodness. It's actually crazy. Like, I feel like this podcast is perfectly timed in my life too, to be here and to be talking to you about this, because it's something I've definitely struggled with my whole life as well. And I come from addicted parents, and I was the same way, where it was almost like I never felt buzzed. I never felt buzzed. I never felt buzzed. And then it's like boom, blacked out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I remember like not making it home most nights, and just like I had a really terrible reputation all through, it started in middle school really all the way through college, and then it started to creep back into my life even after that.
Mm,
And so I never like cold turkey like decided to go completely sober, but after I was saved, so I was saved in like a really like radical way where like I knew that my whole life before was bad, and I knew that I couldn't open portals to demons because I saw a demon, so I became very afraid of opening portals in any way to demons, and I knew that substance abuse was one of those ways that we let
mm,
demons in. So
yeah.
all my friends would smoke weed and drink, and I would still like dabble here and there. It was like I went cold turkey. I stopped doing everything. And then a few months go by, and then I noticed I started dabbling again. And this was
Mm,
after I was saved, and it was the same kind of feeling where, the Lord was telling me like you don't need this anymore, kind of like what you said. And where it wouldn't even feel good. Like in the past it would feel good, but then at this point after I was saved and after I knew the love and fulfillment of the Lord, it was like I would dabble with this stuff and it would feel so empty and so just like, ugh, like heavy.
mhm,
Like it used to feel like something I could, because I had a hard time making friends too. So I feel like that's why I would drink and do these things, is because I was so uncomfortable in my own skin that I
mhm.
needed to be intoxicated to talk to people. And then it made me feel lighter. But then after I was saved, I noticed like every time I did this stuff, I was like, no, like I'm lighter without it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just because once Jesus comes into your life, you see things so much more clearly. You see when things are good and when things are bad. Like even just in the world, like you can clearly see like Satan is among us. Like he is after us.
Yeah.
And you can see when God is fully in it too. And I'm so thankful for that too, with just having my relationship with Jesus, because it does make it so clear in those moments where we might fall short, of like, okay, I know that I have Jesus, and I know that, this is wrong. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
making sense. I'm rambling, but
No, no, that's spot on. And so one of the sayings that like gives me peace in that is, while salvation happens in a moment, sanctification happens over a lifetime. So we just
Mhm,
continue to get fine-tuned. And sometimes there is a little backslide, or sometimes, yeah, we regress, and then we remember like, oh yeah, that was terrible before, it's still terrible now, and what God has is better. And I even
mhm.
had a friend call me and tell me last night, that she's been like feeling lonely, and she ended up in a club again, and she's like, and I just hated it. She's like, the whole time I was like, why am I even here? And I'm like, yeah, I was like telling her, I was reflecting on the same thing. I'm like, I went through that like right after I was saved, where I ended up doing those things again, and it was still as empty as it was when I left it, and I just had to remember that for myself. And then I met my husband, who's like stone cold, like he's never touched anything a day in his life, so he's like, so he's like the backslide police now, like he
That's awesome though.
yeah, yeah, there's no backsliding happening in this house. And I have those cravings too with like wine sometimes, and his family drinks, and sometimes I end up in that debate with myself of like, on celebrations or, camaraderie with the family. But I guess I don't have 100% closure, because every time I do drink, because I'll have wine sometimes, and it still just feels like, I don't know, like I would have been better without it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Even that last beer that I did have, it was, and this is something my husband was working on with me whenever we first started dating, because I would say things like, "Oh, I really need this drink," or "I had a really hard day, so I deserve this drink," or something like that. And in that moment, I was irritated with my family for some reason on Christmas Eve, and so that was my thought process of like, I need a beer. You know what I mean? Because my
Yeah.
family's irritating me right now.
Yeah.
And that was another pause of like, I don't need this alcohol to get through this situation. Like, and it was such great timing then, because the pandemic happened a few months after. And if I had still been drinking, then I would have just drank the entire time that we were in quarantine. And it was just same. I mean, it's God's timing. I just I could not believe it. I was like, thank you, Lord, that I am freed of this and I'm not sitting here wallowing in our apartment.
Yeah, that's so good. It makes me think too, like I have that same discussion with myself, like when I have that craving, like you feel when you have that urge, and then it's like sitting on that, like don't act on it, but like why am I feeling this? What is
Mhm.
it that I'm really seeking that I want to fill this with alcohol with? So like you said, like, oh, I'm like stressed out from my family. It's not like you really need a drink, but it's seeking to fill that space. And so I notice a lot of times it's like I really just need my husband to like take a long walk with me and like talk to me or like hear me cry or something like this that I'm like trying to numb with alcohol instead. So if you just like
Mhm.
push past that. And then you said something else about how you were saved right before quarantine happened. I'm curious how that happened. So you started going to church and
Mhm.
Jesus found you there. Was there like a pivotal moment that you knew that, it was all real and he was God and that you were being saved, or was it all just kind of gradual?
So I was saved in 2017. 2018 was whenever I did the salvation prayer, in January. So I was saved by that time of whenever the Lord told me to stop drinking. But I was still growing. I was like a baby toddler Christian
Yeah.
at that time. But really how I found the Lord, and I'd known him, like I said, my family grew up in a Presbyterian church and everything. And growing up as a dancer, all most of my dance solos were Christian songs, but I
Oh,
just don't
wow.
think I fully understood who God really was. I had a different idea of who he was. So I
Yeah.
had somewhat of a relationship with him. I just had a skewed version. And then I met my husband who, um, he, we were just talking about this earlier. He was like, I would like to say that I was saved, like whenever I met you, but I don't think he was not living it out, but he had a lot of knowledge.
Mm,
Um, and from the stuff that I had gone through, with drinking and whatnot, and some other things, I thought the Lord was mad at me, and I remember saying to Brennan, this was like the first 3 months of us dating, and I was like, he was talking to me about Jesus and everything. I was like, he's mad at me, and he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, Jesus is mad at me for the decisions that I've made and the way that I've been acting and all this stuff, and he's like, that's not true. So he explained all of these things to me and how that's not how the Lord works. He loves you. He wants the best for you. He's not mad at you. You do need to repent, but you're
mm.
going to be forgiven. And that just blew my mind. Now, this was just, kind of a seed that Bren was planted. It wasn't until the end of the summer of that. So that was 2016. And then in 2017 was when we both kind of hit rock bottom. Brennan, who doesn't even drink that much, was drinking a lot. I was drinking a lot. We were smoking weed. We started living together. Like we were just like not, we were just rock bottom.
Yeah.
And there was this church that we passed all of the time. Now we don't go to this church anymore, but we passed it and we were like, we'll give it a try. We would pass it all the time. I'm like, let's just go on Sunday. And so we went and it really felt like home. And I felt like I could be myself. And I just had this like sense of peace. Um, and so so we would go to church on Sundays, and then Brennan's dad, he's just fantastic. He not only is he my father-in-law, but he's my spiritual father. He's just fantastic. So we would start doing. I would teach dance until like literally like 10 p.m. and then we would go over his house and we would do because that was literally the only time I could meet with him. We would do a Bible study um, at their kitchen table until like midnight. And it was so sweet and it was so awesome because he knew that I was dealing with things with, at that time, I was still dealing with things with alcohol.
Yeah.
And so that's what kind of like hit it off was that we're going to do these Bible studies on Wednesday. So I thought I was saved because I was doing all of these things and I was going to church and I was doing this Bible study. So in my head, I'm like, I'm saved, I'm good. Not realizing we have to confess it with our mouth. So it was in January 2018, whenever his dad was like, well, have you confessed it with your mouth? And I was like, I think I have. He's like, well, have you raised your hand on Sundays? I was like,
Ooh.
no, like, you know what I mean? Like, he was like, have you done any of this? Not
Yeah.
in like a judgmental way of just like,
Yeah.
hey, like, actually, you might not be saved. Cause also growing up thinking I was a Christian too, I thought I was good.
And were you
Um,
baptized as a kid?
I was not baptized. I don't think I was as a kid, no.
Okay.
So that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, they'll be baptized as a kid and then think that they're saved, but they've never personally, professed Jesus to be their Lord and Savior. So then that's a whole other, tricky area of like, are you really saved? If you haven't personally made that statement.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
he's
so
asking you these questions.
yeah, so I was saved at their kitchen table, which was really sweet with, Brennan and his mom and his dad. And then that March, we got baptized, both Brennan and I. So Brennan had been baptized a few years ago, but he wanted to rededicate his life to the Lord. So we did it together, and it was so sweet.
Oh.
Um, yeah, it was awesome.
Wow. So did he lead you through that prayer, Brennan's dad, that night at the kitchen table?
Yes, he did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And then so what happened after that?
So we got baptized and we got married that September. And then we started just doing a lot of things at the church that we were at before. Now we're at a new church. And we just started serving a lot. I started serving with the kids,
Mm,
um, which was really awesome. And I maybe because I'm very short, so maybe because I'm at like eye level with them, I was very good at it.
oh,
But we just started like really diving in, and it was really radical the way that we were just having revelation after revelation. We were just reading our Bibles at the time. We got in Bible studies with other people. Um, and it was just like immediate that I just started absorbing all that the Lord had. Like I just couldn't get enough.
mm,
And I love to serve. I still love to serve. I started a dance team at that church, which was really
wow.
awesome. To use my gift in that way, and others in the church to use their gift that way. Um, and then and after that, we ended up leaving that church, and now we go to a really really great healthy church that I just feel like I was actually telling Brennan earlier. I was like thinking about my testimony, and in our testimonies, my friend said this recently or a couple months ago, but like you had your whole testimony, but then you can have like pockets of
Yes,
testimonies. Because I was like,
absolutely.
I don't know when she asked me like about my testimony where it's gonna go. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Because over the last even year, he's done so much with us leaving that church. It was really hard. Um, and now we're in this new place with really, really great people. Like I feel like I'm learning way more now than I did a couple years ago. My heart, that's a whole other, that's what I'm saying. Like that's a whole like section of my testimony that is a lot. But at this time, I just feel like in this new church, we're really, really growing. We have genuinely really great friends that love us and love the Lord even more. And it's just like constantly growing with the Lord and with his people. And it's just so special.
I love that you mentioned that there's little pockets of testimonies too, because I had that question and then I realized I was at a small group at my church and the table leader just shared one of those little pockets when it came time to sharing her testimony. And I realized I was like, oh wait, you can do that too. Like you can share these little pockets and God is so good in the way that he does. He continues to reveal himself and those all become little pockets of testimonies and he keeps doing that. I think
Hmm.
for our whole lives, really. So there's like the one massive one of like, okay, I know I was saved from hell at this point, but then God also continued to reveal himself in these ways too. So, yeah, I get that. And then your family, like they've been observing all this. Has this impacted your family too now?
So my parents started coming to our old church, and it just wasn't a good fit. But they started coming, and it was far from them. It was like about 40 minutes, so it was just too much for them to come every Sunday. So they found their own church, and they're in it now, which is really really awesome. And my dad does a podcast too with his
Wow.
pastor, yeah,
Okay.
and so it's really sweet, and I'm thankful. We're still praying for my sisters, two sisters. One's older and one's younger. They will have conversations with me about it, but it's pretty much just like not. It's not something we really talk about.
Yeah.
So that's tough.
Well, when they're ready, they'll know you as a resource. It's crazy. I reflect on all these people who were in my life along the way that loved the Lord, but it was before I was ready. And so now
Mm.
that I'm saved, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, like He planted you there. Like you were a part of my life in that season to be a reflection of the Lord. I didn't get it yet at that point, but like looking back, like, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I wish, not just my sisters, but other people would see whenever we're trying to even just plant a seed or just talk to somebody about it. Like, we're not, at least for me, I'm not trying to shove this down your throat. I just know how good Jesus is. And I want you to know how great Jesus is too. Like,
Exactly.
I know what you're going through. I know what he can help you overcome. And that's really what it is, and that's kind of a misunderstanding that we have, a misrepresentation rather, of
Yeah,
Christians, like, shoving things down people's throats. It's like, "No, I just wanna tell you how good this is because all you're doing and all you're looking for is literally in Jesus."
exactly. I think that's the powerful thing of a testimony because people can see, like, oh, you used to live just like them. Like, you're not speaking from a place of not being informed. You're speaking from a place of, like, I've lived that. I've felt that pain. I know where you are. And so that's why
Mhm,
I'm sharing, not because I'm just like, oh, holier than thou, but like, I know what it's like. So, yeah, I get that.
mhm.
So now you work with a Christian organization. So how long after you were saved and started doing all this that now you work for like a full-on ministry?
This is the craziest story ever. Talking about pockets of testimony, this is one of them. So I had I had a professional dance gig. I did that life. I was teaching dance, and it got to the point where I was literally working like 6 jobs, like on top of teaching.
Mm,
And so it got to a point of, and we didn't have health insurance, and so I was like, okay, I need to find a job with health insurance, and pays decently and whatnot. And so it was like the hardest. It was one of the hardest seasons, just trying to make that career switch from being in leggings and like a leotard all day to then trying to get like some sort of like I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like kind of sending off my resume to whoever would like look at it.
yeah.
So I started working temporarily at Carnegie Mellon University, just doing different sort of admin stuff. And I was sitting next to this a woman at my like new staff orientation, and we started talking and chatting and stuff. And she was like, "Oh, I'm a Christian," and I was so pumped because that's like finding a unicorn, and
Yeah.
especially in like in at Carnegie Mellon, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing! Look at the Lord! Like we're sitting right next to each other. This is great." So she started inviting me to they'd have like lunch Bible studies once a month. So I started going with her, and she emailed me the one day and was like, "You have to meet Johnny." And I was like, "I don't know who Johnny is, but great, let's meet with Johnny." So we had emailed him in August, and she said, like, "We want to grab lunch with you." This dude didn't answer us back until like January.
Okay.
And at this time, working temporarily, I was like interviewing and sending my resumes everywhere. I was to the point of like, you know what? I'm just going to write out this temp position until maybe they offer the job to me. Um,
Yeah.
and Johnny finally answers us in January. And I was like, who is this guy that's answering us back months later? So I Google him and I see that he works for the CCO. And I'm looking at it and everything and going through what I did in college and seeing that they were helping college students know the Lord. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of this. Like, even if I was just going to be a volunteer, I didn't care. I was like, I need to be a part of this. I don't know how. And
Just
again,
so
at this
I know
point,
the listeners don't know what the CCO is.
oh, the CCO is Coalition for, thank you, Coalition for Christian Outreach, who do campus ministry.
Yeah.
So we're on different campuses across the country, and we'll partner with the local church. So there's different Bible studies you can join and everything, but really the heart is that we're transforming, not us, but the Lord is transforming college students to transform the
Wow.
world, because that's a
That's
pivotal
so
time in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we can relate to the fact that that's when we like super fell off into the alcohol, both of us. So yeah, absolutely. That's so amazing.
So Johnny, I was just like, what is he doing? Who is this guy? I go on their website and I'm looking on their jobs and I see there's an executive assistant job open. Um, I don't really have that background, but I had all this temp work and a couple admin things. So I was like, you know what? I'll think about it. It was a Friday that I saw it, and at this point, I was burnt out from sending job applications. So it wasn't until that Monday that I sat down at my desk, and the Lord was like, "You're gonna apply for that job. Go." And I was like, "Okay." So I spent the whole day. I didn't have much to do, so I literally just spent the whole day. There's different questions you have to ask because it is a Christian ministry. So they want to make sure that it's an actual Christian that's applying. So there's
Yeah.
lots of different questions and everything. And it was like a week or so later that I got a call. And we went through the whole interview process, and I went to Jubilee, and it was fantastic. The day I started the job was the day that the world like shut down. It was March 16th, and it's when COVID was at its whenever it was starting. So I literally started my job on the day that they closed the office. But had I not gotten the if I had not done all of that had not happened, I would have still been in my temp job and I would have been out of a job.
Wow. Isn't it crazy how God will do something at the last moment too, so that you know it was him?
Yes. And it was weird too because I brought it up to my boss in the interview. I was like, because I mean, it literally said like all of my stuff was like dance, and it said like temp work. And he's like, because I was telling him, I was like, I really feel like the Lord wants me to be here. Like, it just like this is the weirdest story. Like, this is only God. And he's like, that's really funny that you say that because we have no idea how your resume even got through because it has to go through like a system. And
Oh
he
my
was like,
goodness.
we're not really sure how yours got through. He said, actually, the first time I looked at your resume, it was between me, like, I was the last two people. Until he looked at the one woman's and it like made sense because it was like all business stuff. Then he looked at mine and he actually said like out loud, like, we're interviewing this girl. Like, what is she doing?
Oh
Like,
my goodness.
it was literally just God. It's
Wow.
the weirdest thing.
Oh my goodness, that's so good. I know so many people who need to hear that message right now, like, just like facing impossible situations, but with God, nothing is impossible.
Yeah,
That's
it was literally insane. I journaled it all too, so I wouldn't forget that feeling. I was like, this is literally only the Lord. There's no other way.
oh, that's amazing. My last question is going to be what your piece of advice would be for like young college-aged girls that are just feeling lost and seeking to fill those voids in all the wrong places, just like the you before you were saved, what your advice would be to that person looking back now.
I think number one is just realizing that your identity is in Christ and Christ alone, and that's enough. To not put your identity in alcohol or a career or work or whatever it may be, but really your identity is in the Lord, and that's enough.
Mm.
And He will literally, He's always there. He'll always listen. He knows what you're going through probably before you're even knowing that you're going through it. But I would say too, for like a college student that's maybe struggling the same way we are, of like, how am I supposed to make friends and everything? It's not alcohol. It's just not. Don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid if you are trying to seek a relationship with the Lord and He's tugging at your heart. Just do it, even if you feel like you're weird or feel like you're different. I just encourage you to really be bold in it because you're going to be such an example to other people that other people are going to follow. It just like breaks my heart thinking of that other people might go through what we did.
Mhm.
And it makes me sick because I'm just like, listen, there's Jesus and He will do absolutely anything for you and He loves you and He cares for you.
Mm. And none of those friends that you meet while drinking, none of them last. Anyway,
No.
it's all temporary because then once you find the Lord, then you like actually are set on a solid foundation to make real relationships and impact.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Rudy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm gonna connect your TikTok so people can find you after this.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a great night.
You too.